I'm gonna go ahead and keep it a buck and say that the beginning of The Quiet Place 2 was worth the price of admission alone. It was worth the overpriced popcorn and candy. It was worth me sitting through all the previews, which they seem to have a lot, like 30 minutes of previews, because there were also little parts where actors for different movies were like thanking you for going back to the movies, which is annoying. And just basically everything that goes along with going to the movies, that is kind of an inconvenience, but at the same time it felt right, because it's been a while and I don't go all the time like we used to because of everything that's been going on. But the beginning of the movie, spoiler alert right now for Quiet Place 2, but the beginning of the movie basically tells you how this whole pandemic happened. Now, when I watched The Quiet Place 1, I was wondering, and I was actually skeptical, because I was like, these monsters that hunt by sound, like how could anybody survive? Like what would the beginning days of this invasion look like, where they're just wiping people out when they're just attacking anything wildly and violently with sound? It'd be like a bloodbath. And the beginning of A Quiet Place 2, it shows you that bloodbath. They literally, when the day happens, they show you day one when the meteors hit, and I'm assuming that these monsters came out of the meteors. These monsters, once the meteors hit or land, like within seconds, these monsters are running at the speed of what can only be sound, and they ironically, and they are just smashing through people with like so much force that these people are like flying around like rag dolls, like even worse than GTA physics. They're just flying. Like, it is crazy, the beginning of this movie, and that was my favorite part, because these creatures, this has to be the most sophisticated and advanced movie monster, pandemic movie monster, end of the world movie monster that we've ever seen. It is far worse than zombies. It is far worse than any other alien that we've seen, or any kaiju, because first of all, invulnerable to bullets. They cannot be hurt by bullets unless you shoot them in the face, which is really hard because they're very, very fast. You have to be extremely quiet or they attack violently, and they're so big, their arms are so long and wide that they're perfectly meant for just ripping through anything that they can find, and they seem to really not have any difficulty ripping into anything like trains and cars or houses. Anything seems to be within their grasp, even tons of metal like you're gonna see in the factory in Quiet Place 2, where you see this creature just tearing through layers of metal and iron. It is crazy how strong this thing is, and so that's what you see at the very beginning. But the worst part is, since they're cutting through swaths of people, they're just tearing through them relentlessly and cutting them to ribbons, essentially, through all these people. And because you're not supposed to make a sound, like really realistically, you could not bury these people that are just laying on the ground. So skeletons and decomposing bodies and disease would be everywhere. If you were in a city, if you were unlucky enough to be living in a city at this time, you would just be walking through piles of dead bodies, and that would be it, dude. You would have piles of dead bodies and disease, and you couldn't bury them, you couldn't move them because you'd be making way too much noise. You would be shoveling holes or trying to, too much noise, throwing them in the incinerator, too much noise. So you'd have to just leave them there, and that's probably the darkest part of A Quiet Place 2, that you have to do that. But after you get that initial scene, you have a whole movie where you are reminded that these things are killing machines. They are way worse than even zombies, in my opinion, like The Walking Dead, Army of the Dead. They are a completely different level in this, because those zombies, yeah, they are going to eat you, and some of them can run, some of them can walk, but they're basically doing all this stuff around human level, and they don't just attack you based on sound. Like a little bit of sound, they don't come out of nowhere like a rampaging bull. They attack you, but it's usually on sight. At least the ones in Army of the Dead. The Walking Dead, it is sound, but they're very slow. They walk, essentially. These things just barrel into you and try to get you because they have a vendetta against sound, and it's crazy, honestly. It's really insane. But for those of you guys who watched the first one, you guys know that they found out a way to defeat these creatures by using a hearing aid, the frequency of one, and you put it in a microphone, and that makes a sound that really puts them in agony and opens up their face so they can easily be shot like in a video game. So that's how they defeat these in this movie. And when they find a signal coming off an island, because you also find out that they cannot swim, which makes sense. If you look at the design of these things, they don't seem like swimmers. They have a really weird body that's very specific for land, and the only way that they could swim is either hijacking a boat, like on a boat, which ends up happening, or they just kind of like, they don't swim. If they go in the water, they sink essentially. They are very heavy also, which makes sense for how much carnage they make and how they're bulletproof and stuff. But this signal is coming from an island, and that's the whole point, to go to that island, give them the earpiece, and that way when they get the earpiece, they can put that sound on any frequency in the valley, which is only in the surrounding area, you know, probably like it's a good chunk, so it'd be like a safe zone basically, and you can use this frequency as a weapon against these creatures, stunning them enough to shoot them. That's essentially the plan, and the girl wants to save humanity from doing that, like at least the ones around that area. And so that opens up the story for A Quiet Place 3, which is definitely going to happen, and I'm excited to see that. The stupidest thing that happens in the movie is when they have these kids. They have children in these movies. The same thing with Army of the Dead, where they had that girl where she went off on her own to find the lost people in the casino. Like, she basically jeopardized the mission and kills everybody. Well, in this movie, this kid is left with the baby because the mom goes and gets him help, gets him bandages, and he decides for no apparent reason just to walk around. Instead of being with the baby, he decides to explore the factory that they're in, and then he finds that the guy who is living there, he says his wife died. Well, his wife's dead body, he never buried it. It's upstairs, and which makes sense. You can't bury these. You've been making too much noise burying. So the body's still there. It's kind of like mummified, and he gets scared, and he makes a big noise, and the creature comes and attacks him. He gets in there right away, but then he accidentally locks himself in this little type of safe thing that they've been using so they can be quiet in there. And the creature, he runs out of air, and the baby starts running out of air, and the mom comes, and she's very smart because the rain makes them not be able to hear anything. It kind of like blinds their senses also in a way, or blinds people to them. So she sets fire to one of the creatures, which is awesome, and then the sprinkler system comes on, and then she goes back underneath and saves the kid. The kid didn't have to do that. That part didn't have to happen, but there needs to be drama in that area because they really didn't do anything. They didn't move around or anything. There's no violence going on in that area, as opposed to the girl and the guy who are on an adventure. There is violence with them when it comes to them being people and then going to the island and then accidentally bringing one of those creatures along on a boat because of the things that happen with the people. And so that was the part that really stuck out to me as a really annoying thing. But if you have children or you know kids, they will always do stupid shit. They always will get into stupid shit because they don't think like adults do for the most part. They don't think of the consequences or whatever, and they are restless. So it makes sense in both these movies for these kids to be like this, but at the same time, I'm just kind of tired of seeing it as a way to propel drama in these movies, I guess, even though it's unrealistic in a sense, but it's extremely realistic in another sense. But the movie overall is great, and I think this is one of my favorite monsters in any movie, and like the scariest monster definitely in any movie that I've ever seen when it comes to these type of end of the world scenarios. But anyway, let me know in the comments below what you guys thought of A Quiet Place 2. If you've seen it, this is going to be Sunscape signing off. Take care, guys.